In June 2025, Australia began treating buy now, pay later products more like formal credit. That decision came after more than a decade in which one company had helped reshape the way millions of people paid for everyday purchases. That company was Afterpay. Founded in 2014 by Nick Molnar and Anthony Eisen, it grew from an Australian startup into a global platform with more than 24 million customers and more than 348,000 merchants before becoming part of Block in 2022. The product looks straightforward. A customer could buy something immediately and repay the purchase in installments over time. The standard model became 4 interest-free installments, with late fees if payments were missed. But the significance of Afterpay was never just the payment plan. The company found a way to place short-term credit directly inside the retail experience and make that useful not only to shoppers, but to merchants and eventually to much larger financial platforms. This is not simply the story of a successful startup. It is a story about incentives. Consumers wanted flexibility, retailers wanted higher conversion, investors wanted scale, regulators wanted stronger safeguards. Afterpay sat in the middle of all 4. This is Inside Corporate Australia, told through the stories that shaped it. Afterpay emerged into a market where traditional credit products were well established, but consumer preferences were beginning to shift. In its 2024 submission to Treasury, Afterpay argued that buy now, pay later products offered consumers a cheaper and easier way to access credit than traditional forms such as credit cards, payday loans, and consumer leases. Mandala's 2024 research said younger consumers, especially Gen Z and millennials, had a strong preference for buy now, pay later, and were much less likely to own a credit card if they had used BNPL in the previous 12 months. That preference mattered because payment products compete on more than interest rates and fees. They also compete on simplicity, control, and emotional framing. A credit card creates an ongoing credit relationship. Afterpay attached a repayment to a specific purchase and a fixed schedule. There was a commercial opening on the retail side as well. Merchants were operating in an environment where checkout friction, customer acquisition costs, and conversion rates had become central to profitability. Mandala's 2024 report said Afterpay generated $9.6 billion in incremental sales for Australian merchants in 2023 and $711 million in cost efficiencies, including lower costs of servicing online sales, reduced acquisition costs through the Afterpay directory, and lower return rates for online purchases. That combination explains why Afterpay spread so quickly. Consumers saw a more manageable way to pay. Merchants saw a tool that could lift sales. When both sides of a transaction find the same product useful, growth can accelerate very fast. According to Afterpay's own materials, the business began with a conversation between neighbors Nick Molnar and Anthony Eisen. And by 2014, they had registered the business and were securing their first retailers. Nick Molnar's background helps explain the company's early instincts. Public profiles describe him as someone who had been selling jewelry online from a young age and had built experience in retail before co-founding Afterpay. That matters, because Afterpay did not begin as a purely financial innovation. It began as a retail insight. The founders appear to have understood that if payment flexibility could be presented as part of the shopping experience, rather than as a separate borrowing decision, adoption could move much faster. The model they built was simple on the surface. Consumers could buy immediately and pay in 4 installments over 6 weeks, with no interest if they paid on time. Revenue came primarily from merchant fees, while late fees applied if scheduled payments were missed. That structure gave the business 2 audiences at once. For consumers, it could be presented as a simpler and more controlled way to pay over time. For merchants, it could be presented as a tool for growth. In its submission to Treasury, Afterpay argued that products like its own increased business for merchants while providing consumers with a lower cost alternative to more traditional forms of credit. In other words, Afterpay was not trying to become a better credit card. It was building a product that made credit feel native to retail. The strongest way to understand Afterpay is not simply as a lender or payment app. It is as a company that made short-term credit commercially valuable at the point of sale. This distinction matters because products grow differently when merchants want them as much as consumers do. Mandela's 2024 analysis said Afterpay connected 129,000 Australian merchants with 3.5 million active Australian customers and generated $13.4 billion in sales in 2023. The same report said Afterpay delivered $5 billion in net benefits to Australian merchants through a combination of incremental sales and operating efficiencies. Those figures explain why the phrase turning credit into a retail product is more than a line. Afterpay did not simply offer deferred payment. It offered merchants a way to reduce friction at checkout and increase sales momentum. That made the product useful not just as finance, but as retail infrastructure. There was also a strong consumer side argument. Mandela's report said Australian Afterpay users saved $127 million in fees and interest in 2023 compared with credit cards, and the active customers paid an average cost of 0.6% over purchase price, including late fees, compared with 1.5% on credit card purchases. Those figures come from research supportive of Afterpay's position, so they should be treated carefully. But they still show how the company and its supporters understood the product's role in the market as a lower friction, merchant-backed form of consumer finance. That was the strategic breakthrough. Afterpay made delayed payment feel less like borrowing and more like a purchasing option. Once that shift took hold, the company was no longer just selling convenience. It was participating in a larger change in how shopping and finance interacted. Afterpay's official timeline shows how quickly the business expanded. The company says it registered in 2014, debuted on the ASX in 2016, reached 1 million customers and more than 7,200 merchant partners in 2017 while launching in New Zealand, entered the United States in 2018, launched in the UK under the ClearPay name in 2019, reached 5 million customers in the US, and launched in Canada in 2020, and became part of Block in 2022. That sequence is more than a list of milestones. It suggests that the company found product market fit early and then replicated it across multiple major consumer markets. Afterpay's newsroom says the platform now has more than 24 million customers and more than 348,000 merchants globally. Those numbers suggest that adoption was not confined to one geography or one retail category. The structure of the growth story also matters. More merchants made Afterpay more useful to consumers. More consumers made the platform more attractive to merchants. That kind of reinforcing loop is one of the clearest paths to scale in consumer-facing technology. By the early 2020s, Afterpay no longer looked like a niche Australian fintech. It looked like a company sitting inside a broader shift in commerce, where payment, discovery, conversion, and customer behavior were becoming increasingly connected. That is usually the point at which a business becomes interesting not only to shareholders, but to larger platforms that want to own the surrounding ecosystem. In August 2021, Square announced plans to acquire Afterpay in an all-stock deal valued at approximately $29 billion US, or around 39 billion Australian dollars at the time. The acquisition was completed at the end of January 2022, after which Afterpay became a wholly owned indirect subsidiary of Block. The strategic logic described by Block was very clear. The company said the transaction would allow tighter integration between Square's seller ecosystem and Cash App's consumer ecosystem. Sellers would be able to offer buy now, pay later more easily at checkout. Afterpay customers would be able to manage installment payments in Cash App. Cash App customers would be able to discover sellers and BNPL offers inside the app. That tells us what Afterpay had become by this point. It was no longer just a payment option at checkout. It was an asset that could connect merchants, payments, and consumer attention across a much larger network. The acquisition also says something important about value creation in modern financial technology. A company becomes strategically important when it solves a difficult distribution problem. In Afterpay's case, it had found a place inside the commercial flow between shoppers and retailers, and that position had become valuable enough for one of the world's largest fintech platforms to buy it outright. So the meaning of the deal was larger than the price tag. It confirmed that Afterpay was no longer being valued only as a fast-growing company. It was being valued as infrastructure. Afterpay's rise also made the broader buy now, pay later sector harder for regulators to ignore. ASIC says the Treasury Laws Amendment, Responsible Buy Now, Pay Later and Other Measures, Act 2024, extended the National Credit Code to buy now, pay later contracts. From June 10, 2025, providers of BNPL contracts were required to hold an Australian credit license, authorising them to engage in credit activities as a credit provider, subject to transitional arrangements. ASIC also said the reforms would provide stronger consumer protection and that some buy now, pay later products would be regulated as low-cost credit contracts, with a modified responsible lending framework available in certain cases. This is one of the most important developments in the entire Afterpay story. It shows that buy now, pay later had moved from being treated as a novel payment category to being treated as a form of credit that required a more formal legal structure. Afterpay's own 2024 submission to Treasury welcomed a tailored framework and argued that buy now, pay later products generated benefits for consumers, merchants, and the broader economy. The submission claimed that Afterpay supported 3.5 million Australians, connected them with more than 129,000 businesses, contributed $3.9 billion to Australian GDP, and supported 39,000 local jobs in 2023. What matters here is not reducing the debate to a simple fight between innovation and regulation. What matters is that both the company's defense and the regulator's response point to the same conclusion. Buy now, pay later have become too significant to remain outside a serious institutional settlement. That is often how financial history works. New products begin at the edges of the system. Once they become large enough, the system redraws the boundary around them. So what did Afterpay actually change? At the most immediate level, it changed the checkout. It gave consumers a new way to spread payment over time and gave merchants a commercially useful reason to offer that option. At a larger level, it changed how installment credit was presented. Instead of being experienced mainly through a bank-issued credit card or a longer-term financing arrangement, repayment could be embedded directly into the purchase flow and framed as part of ordinary shopping. That change reached meaningful scale in Australia. Mandala's 2024 report said, Afterpay contributed $3.9 billion to GDP and supported 39,000 jobs in 2023, while Afterpay's own materials say the platform reached more than 24 million customers and more than 348,000 merchants globally. It also changed the behavior of the wider system. Merchants adapted to payment flexibility as part of their sales strategy. Larger fintech platforms moved to integrate buy now, pay later into broader ecosystems. Regulators changed the legal treatment of the category. That is why Afterpay belongs in a serious business documentary. The company did not just build a popular app. It influenced the relationship between retail, consumer finance, and regulation in modern Australia. Afterpay's rise was built on a simple proposition. Let the customer take the product now and spread the payment over time. But the consequences of that proposition became much larger than the interface suggested. By aligning consumer convenience with merchant incentives, Afterpay built a business that could scale quickly across retail categories and international markets. By becoming strategically useful to both merchants and platforms, it became valuable enough for Block to acquire in a deal worth about $29 billion US. And by becoming large enough to matter systemically, it became part of a broader regulatory shift that brought buy now, pay later products into a stronger formal credit framework from June 2025. That is the real significance of Afterpay. It changed more than how people paid. It changed where credit sat inside the shopping experience, who benefited from its use, and how the Australian system eventually chose to regulate it. And that is why this story matters. It is one of the clearest examples in modern corporate Australia of how a product that looks small at the beginning can end up reshaping behavior, business models, and the rules around them. Every company has a story, but not all of them are told. Some rise, some fall, all leave a mark on Australia's corporate landscape. This is Inside Corporate Australia, told through the stories that shaped it.